Outlook. With Lisa Kelly and Louie DePalma.
And welcome back to Honest Conversations with Lisa and Louie. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Louie. How are you?
Today's theme is Honest Conversations.
Yeah, it is, and we have an amazing guest speaker today. And this topic is really important because a desire to keep things, comfortable can really inhibit progress, can inhibit us from tackling tough topics.
And what prevents us from being honest?
Oh, there's so many things. I guess everybody has their own individual reasons, but I think in general, fear of hurting people's feelings, fear of misunderstandings, looking like you're uneducated or unsympathetic. Just having those difficult conversations can be very uncomfortable for some people.
And that discomfort in dealing with difficult topics, it can really prevent an organization from advancing.
Yeah, think about it. Change drives innovation. The world is moving quickly. Businesses need to keep up. So if we can't tackle tough topics, if we can't have honest conversations around that, we're going to inhibit, productivity, profitability, and the long-term success of our businesses.
Yeah. And change is difficult, or everyone would be doing it. Like, we're all comfortable. We all like our routines. We like to stay in our zone.
Yeah, we like that well-trod path. We like to walk along it, feel comfortable, feel like we know what we're doing.
Yeah, and did we say today it was honesty, honest conversations? I have something I do want to say to you that I've been meaning to say to you for a while.
Nope. We're going to turn right now to our hot topic for the day. Are Canadians just too polite? Louie, have you heard the one about the overly polite Canadian?
Never.
I'm sorry. Bad joke for the day. According to a survey by the Angus Reid Institute, the majority of Canadians say we've just gone too far when it comes to our need to say no offense or sorry. 80% of Canadians tell us that it seems like you can't say anything to anyone without somebody getting offended. And 4 out of 5 Canadians say that there's just some things you shouldn't say in front of people you don't know. 87% of Canadians tell us they self-censor because they tell us they want to be polite, while only 13% say they bit their tongue because they don't want to be judged by somebody else.
Lisa, I did a survey of my own.
Really?
I didn't tell anybody. I've been counting the number of times our producer has said sorry in the last 30 minutes. Can you guess the number?
I have no idea.
6. I have no idea why he was apologizing. He didn't do anything wrong.
Sorry.
Oh, see, there he goes again.
Louie, it's important that we have, respectful conversations, always. We don't want to go out of our way to offend anyone. But we also want to show that we're interested in meaningful and productive conversations. And sometimes that means tackling tough conversations. So we want to aim for clarity, and we want to challenge the status quo when we need to. A couple episodes ago, we had my friend Zeus on, and he had an interesting take on what he thinks about Canadian politeness.
So, when I moved to Canada, definitely the Canadian politeness stood out to me. Ironically, it's something that actually affected my interviewing skills and my ability to gauge if an interview was going well or whether I got the job. Back home, interviews tended to be a little bit more intense. Back in Mumbai, you didn't get the job, you'd probably know right on the spot, sometimes in the middle of an interview, and they would give you the feedback and end the interview right there. When I come here, sometimes I get to the final round of the interview and they say, it's been so great speaking to you. This is going to be your desk. This is going to be your team. This is Sharon. This is where the cafeteria is. You're going to love working here. And then 2 days later, you get an email saying, I'm really sorry, but we moved in another direction. It blew my mind initially, but then I learned about reading between the lines and trying to follow up to see if I really got the position. I definitely thought that that was interesting when I first moved here.
And now it's time for our feature segment for this episode.
Earlier, we had a conversation with Kim Scott. Kim is the author of 2 books, Just Work, Get Bleep Done, Fast and Fair, as well as her earlier work, Radical Candor, How to Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity. Kim co-founded 2 companies to put those ideas into practice and share them across organizations. She was a CEO coach at Dropbox, Qualtrics, and Twitter, as well as other tech companies. She's previously held leadership positions at Google and Apple, and earlier in her career, Kim managed a pediatric clinic in Kosovo and started a diamond cutting factory in Moscow. Let's have a look.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you
Just
for
a
having
pleasure
me.
to have you.
It's great to be here.
I'm going to start off by just holding up your book, Radical Candor. Just an awesome book that you've written here. So tell us, how did you choose this title, and what really are you trying to say in this?
So, true confession, I thought about calling this book Compassionate Candor. And there's an argument that that would have been more what I meant, but radical candor sounded cooler, frankly. And I think it probably sold more books. But what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to get across here is the idea of caring personally at the same time that you challenge directly, which doesn't seem so radical. And yet it's very rare that we do both at the same time. And it's everyone that I've ever met struggles with feedback at work. And that's kind of why I called it Radical Candor. It got named between the first and the 14th floor of a conference center where I gave a talk. Actually, I bumped into Dan Pink, who has written many wonderful books. And at that point, I think I was calling it Tough Love or something. And he's like, that doesn't sound very interesting. And somehow between the first floor and the 14th floor, we came up with Radical Candor.
Well, I'm really glad you took the elevator because tough love has been used. Okay.
Yeah.
As you know, in many circles. So can you tell us a little bit about those 4 quadrants in the book?
Sure. So if you think about what radical candor is, so let's, the 4 quadrants, vertical line is care personally, horizontal line is challenge directly. When you do both at the same time, it's radical candor. You're in the upper right-hand quadrant. Now, there are some times when we remember to challenge directly, but we failed to show that we care personally. And that I call obnoxious aggression. In an earlier version of the book, I call that the a-hole quadrant because it seemed more radically candid. And I stopped doing that for a very important reason. I stopped doing that because I found that when I did, people would use this radical candor 2 by 2 to start writing names in boxes. And I beg of you, don't use this framework that way. This is not another Myers-Briggs personality test. Use this framework to guide specific conversations with specific people to a better place. So we know we don't want to be in obnoxious aggression. Very few people want to act like a jerk. And there's a lot of dangers, obviously. You're wasting your breath because you've put the other person in fight or flight mode. You've hurt someone else. But one of the more subtle problems with obnoxious aggression is that very often when we realize we've landed there, it's our instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly instead of going the right way on care personally. And then we wind up in the worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. And that's where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, if obnoxious aggression is front stabbing, manipulative insincerity is backstabbing, all of the things that make work and life really sort of intolerable occur in those 2 quadrants. And yet, those are not the most common mistakes that we make. Although when we talk about things that go wrong in our relationships, we're often talking about obnoxious aggression or manipulative insincerity, because that's where the drama is. If you watch The Office, you're going to see a lot of episodes about those behaviors. But in my experience, the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally. Because it turns out that Most people, despite everything we notice on social media, are actually pretty nice people. So we do remember to show that we care personally, but we're so concerned about not hurting someone's feelings in the short run or not upsetting them in the short run that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And that is what I call ruinous empathy.
So we work in the discoverability network space is disability and employment. And difficult conversations, I prefer to call them honest conversations, need to take place for everybody to really benefit. So what are two communication principles to follow when you're asking for or providing feedback?
When you're asking for feedback, I think can I give you four things? There's four things to remember. So when you're asking for feedback, you want to make sure that you have a good question, sort of that will fall trippingly off your tongue. So the question that I like to ask is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? And that's the kind of question you want to ask people, not just once a year, but like once a week at least, in the right moment. So you want to ask that question. So the second thing you need to do is to embrace the discomfort. You need to, and the best way I know of to do this is to count to 6 in your head. I only made it to 3 just there, and I could tell you were getting uncomfortable. Almost no one can endure 6 seconds of silence. So if you can remain silent for 6 seconds, the person is going to tell you something. The next thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you're listening with the intent to understand, not to respond, because it is natural that you're going to feel if you just ask for some criticism, but when you get it, it may sting a little bit. You may feel a little bit defensive. That's okay. That just means you're human. It doesn't mean you're shut down to feedback, but you need to be prepared to manage that. So one of the things that I like to do is to try to ask a follow-up question. Make sure that you're getting curious, not furious when you get that feedback. And then last but not least, you've got to reward the candor. It's not enough not to get defensive, but if you agree with the feedback, you fix the problem and be sort of theatrical. Show the person what you did to fix the problem and ask them, did I overcorrect? Did I not go far enough? And if you disagree with the feedback, which you're allowed to do, this is radical candor, right? Don't pretend that you agree when you disagree. But if you disagree with the feedback, take a moment to identify there's something that person said that you can agree with. So look for that 5 or 10% of whatever the person said that you can agree with and give voice to that just to demonstrate that you're not shut down. And then have a follow-up conversation, or you can have it in the moment if you're not feeling too frustrated or defensive. But have a follow-up conversation in which you explain to the person why you disagree in a respectful way. And you can't argue endlessly. At some point, you got to listen, challenge, commit. But very often, a good relationship is forged actually in a disagreement, in a respectful. What is really damaging to your relationships is when you pretend to agree, but you actually disagree. People sense that. So those are a few thoughts on soliciting feedback. When it comes time to giving feedback, the best feedback I've ever gotten in my whole career has always happened in these impromptu 2-minute conversations. And so the thing that I like to remind people to do is to leave a little slack time in their schedule. Make sure that you have time to walk back to someone's office with them if you're in person, or to pick up the phone and call them if you're working remotely. So if all of your meetings that are 1 hour long become 50 minutes, and all your meetings that are 30 minutes long become 25 minutes, you have a little bit of slack to have these conversations, these impromptu conversations with people, or to go to the bathroom or get a cup of tea. You need to take care of yourself as well.
That's some great feedback for all of us to think about. How can we make the concept of honest feedback less scary, less difficult for managers, employers, and employees?
I wish that I had emotional Novocaine to offer people, but I don't. It is uncomfortable. So I think part of this is about building stamina for these conversations and beginning to practice them. And remember that radical candor should feel like brushing and flossing. It should not feel like a root canal. So this is about these impromptu 2-minute conversations that you're having all the time. There's two stories that if you think of your versions of the stories that will really help you. One was about that moment in my career when someone told me something that stung a little bit at the time, but stood me in good stead for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that enables me to remember that radical candor is an act of kindness. It's actually mean to remain silent. The other thing that I did is to think about what's a moment when I failed to give someone some radical candor and it had bad results. And when I think of those two stories, it helps me remember that radical candor is an act of kindness. I think a big part of what makes us hesitate is ruinous empathy, is feeling like it's mean, but it's actually kind to tell the person this thing. The other thing, of course, that sometimes trips me up is manipulative insincerity. I'm concerned that if I tell the person this thing, they'll get upset, and then they or other people will think I'm a big you know what. And so that's kind of I have to let go of that and realize that my job is to be in service to this other person, not to protect myself.
I think there's a natural flow out of that. If we could talk about that ruinous empathy piece for a minute. I think of so many examples of job seekers or people experiencing difficulty who have a disability, some that don't, where they don't receive honest and direct feedback to move them forward. So I saw this a lot, particularly when I was an employment counselor helping people with disabilities in their job search. Can you speak to how that response, a little bit, more in depth, the ruinous empathy can be problematic?
Yes, I write a lot about this in my second book, which is called Just Work. And one of the things that happens very often for people who are underrepresented along any dimension, so it could be a disability, it could be you're a woman in a male-dominated industry, you could be Black in a white-dominated company, and so anytime someone is underrepresented, what happens is a special form of ruinous empathy, which there's a great article written by David Thomas, who's the president of Morehouse College, and he calls it protective hesitation. And so when we're working with someone who's different from us along some dimension, we're often more reluctant to share with them the feedback that they need in order to succeed. And so I want to acknowledge that this is uncomfortable, but if you are a manager and you're managing someone with a disability, it is your job to tell them, to give them the feedback that they need in order to grow and to succeed in the workplace. I thought about this a lot as I was writing the book, because I think it happens all the time where someone fails, a manager fails, or a peer, a colleague fails to tell someone something that is so important for them to succeed. And it's not that the person who fails to say the thing is a evil person or trying to hurt the other person. The instinct is one of kindness, and we want to hold on to that kindness, but we want to think about what the person really needs. And then there's also a part of it that maybe is not necessarily an act of kindness, but I'm afraid if I say or do the thing, then I will look like, something. I'll look like someone who is ableist or is sexist or is racist, and that fear can actually cause us to do the thing that is ableist or sexist or racist, which is not give the feedback. So I think remembering that is really helpful. There's a wonderful book called Whistling Vivaldi. And it's about all the different kinds of biases that are not all of, we couldn't just too, it would be too long even for a very long book, but many of the kinds of biases that prevent us from doing our best work and making good decisions. And Claude Steele, who wrote that book, talks about being the only, in this case, he was the only Black student in his PhD program. And he said the thing that helped him more than anything else was feedback from his academic advisor. But he did a study that showed that very often people, because they're afraid of being labeled something or other, they don't give the feedback. Managers don't give the feedback. So I think if you have a disability, you need to realize that it's not fair, but your manager might be failing to give you feedback. So you need to maybe work a little bit harder to solicit feedback. And if you're a manager and you think you're being nice to withhold feedback from someone, remember, it's not nice, because you're preventing the person from succeeding.